All right, today we're going to be doing Hamilton's defense of the independent judiciary found in Federalist 78. So without further ado, let's dive right in. Document snapshot. This is specifically on the judicial branch. So we're in a period of the Federalist Papers where Hamilton's defending some of the anti-Federalist arguments about the judiciary. Now, if you're approaching this from an anti-Federalist position, you can kind of understand why the judiciary is scary. They are the ultimate authority when it comes to interpreting the law. It seems as if they're going to have some power over the legislature if the legislative branch is making the laws, but now the courts are interpreting the laws. That's a lot of power. They're unelected by the people, totally unelected. They're appointed by the executive. They're approved by the Senate. So there's no connective tissue between the will of the people and the judges. Okay. Not only that, but now they serve for life. You know who else serves for life? Kings, queens, monarchs. So this is a particularly terrifying set of circumstances for the anti-federalists. They voice their opinions and Hamilton responds. Okay. Lifetime appointments, he refers to that as good behavior during times of good behavior, amounting to, as long as they're not violating the trust of the people, that they aren't committing treason or bribery, they will be allowed to keep their tenure of office for life. Okay. But the term that's used is good behavior. It ensures that only qualified judges will be offered a position because of the long-term effects they'll have on constitutional law. So the executive and the Senate, in picking those federal judges, will be very careful about the type of person they're putting forward, because that person is going to affect jurisprudence for many, many years. Okay, so that's a positive of this lifetime tenure that Hamilton argues for. It also makes them independent from that pesky legislative branch. Don't forget that they viewed Congress as the most dangerous branch of government based on the Constitution. So this gives the judiciary some independence. It makes them strong because otherwise the judicial branch would be clearly the weakest branch of government. He also, within this paper, which we'll get to a little bit later, alludes to the power of judicial review. Okay, so we will talk about that as well. Okay. Why lifetime appointments? It provides insulation from the encroachments of Congress and the executive. In fact, only through allying with those other branches is the judiciary even a threat. That's why they need lifetime appointments, to remain independent from those other branches. Okay. Secure a steady, upright, and impartial administration of the laws. Basically, these judges are going to need to be knowledgeable and have a lot of experience in order to be effective at their job. They'll get that knowledge, that experience by serving for life. Okay. Inflexible and uniform adherence to the rights of the Constitution, also probably going to make them unpopular. So they need that independence. They need that lifetime appointment, so that they're not worried about making the people happy. They can be inflexible and uniform in adhering to the Constitution. They don't have to get elected. They don't have to raise campaign finance or funds. Okay. They can focus on doing their job, which is interpreting the Constitution. Okay. The courts were designed to be an intermediate body between the people and the legislature in order to keep Congress within their limits assigned to their authority. Again, this branch exists in part to check the power of Congress, which the framers thought was the most dangerous branch of government. Least dangerous branch. The judiciary, from the nature of its functions, will always be the least dangerous to the political rights of the Constitution, because it will be least in capacity to annoy or injure them. The judicial branch doesn't have any powers of its own. It relies on coordination with the other branches in order to have any real power. For instance, it goes on to say the executive not only dispenses the honors, but holds the sword of the community. Okay, the commander-in-chief. The legislature not only commands the power of the purse, but prescribes the rules by which the duties and rights of every citizen are to be regulated. They are the lawmaking body. The judiciary, on the contrary, has no influence over either the sword or the purse, no direction either of the strength or of the wealth of society, and can take no active resolution whatsoever. Basically, judges depend on the aid of the executive arm to even enforce their decisions, which this shows up when Andrew Jackson refused to enforce a judicial decision. Okay, so that did happen. He goes on to talk about limited constitution, which I just wanted to include briefly because it could show up or it might be useful to you in an argumentative essay. He defines it as one which contains certain specified exemptions to the legislative authority, such, for instance, as that it shall pass no bills of attainder, no ex post facto laws, and the like, which is in our Constitution. Congress cannot do those, passing bills of attainder, ex post facto laws. So Congress's power is limited, and an independent judiciary is essential to ensure that they don't pass laws that would expand congressional power outside of their constitutional limits. Okay. I need you to understand the framers feared the power of Congress more than any other branch of government. So Madison does go on to talk about judicial review. My face is in the way. Let me move that. The limitations of this kind can be preserved in practice no other way than through the medium of the courts of justice, whose duty it must be to declare all acts contrary to the manifest tenor of the Constitution, void. If a law passed by Congress does not match with the Constitution supreme law of the land, that law's got to go. Okay, and that power is vested in the judicial branch. No legislative act, therefore, contrary to the Constitution, can be valid. It has to be declared null and void. The interpretation of the law is the proper and peculiar province of the courts. Okay, so this is not something that the legislative branch gets any control over. This is purely the judicial branch's power. And yes, Marbury versus Madison is important because it's the court exercising that power of judicial review and declaring in one of their decisions that the power exists. But the framers knew that was a constitutional power. It's inherent within the judicial branch's job. It's not listed in the Constitution, but it's inherent in their job. Hamilton even talks about amending the Constitution here. He doesn't lay out an argument for amending or not amending, but he does connect it to the judicial branch. Factions could present a threat to the judiciary if they didn't have the type of independence outlined in the proposed Constitution. People can change their minds, and they can change their minds quickly. But our amendment process is slow and methodical. Okay, the court's job is to defend the existing Constitution, even if a majority of the people want the Constitution to say something else. The amendment process requires some serious deliberation, some pretty high bar for changing the Constitution. But if the change is more than a fleeting request to the mob, it will be enacted through the constitutional provisions, and the court will have to move forward with it. But this is kind of designed, Hamilton basically saying, these judges are not going to be popular people. They're enforcing a constitutional law that at certain times a majority of citizens might not agree with. But there's a mechanism if those citizens think that it is truly something, worth changing, where they can promote, amending the Constitution. But until that's done, the judges enforce the Constitution that exists. Okay. He also talks about justice, as no man can be sure that he may not be tomorrow the victim of a spirit of injustice by which he may be a gainer today. So this screams letter from a Birmingham jail to me. He goes on to say that judges have a big job, not only standing up to the legislature, but also the people, because sometimes people promote laws that restrict the private rights of a particular class of citizens, or are partial laws in which they're only affecting certain groups, which this just screams, MLK's discussion of just and unjust laws. Okay. So you want to focus on that connection. Stand up to unjust laws, because what benefits you today as a member of the majority may be used against you in the future if you're no longer a member of the group in power. Okay. He even says a little bit about stare decisis, which is another argument for the judiciary having lifetime appointments. They're going to have to base their decisions off precedents, and to establish a clear line of reasoning in new cases as they pop up. And the best way to do that is to give these judges lifetime appointments, because then they can base their decisions on precedent that they've had a hand in making. And lastly, my best guess for how Fed 78 could be used. Judicial review, lifetime appointments argument is a popular one. If you get that one, that's kind of a softball, so I can't imagine them giving that to you. The court's role as defender of the Constitution. He goes on and on throughout this paper discussing that point. The framers' fears of the power of the federal legislature, Congress. So you take what was mentioned in Fed 70, and you take what's mentioned in Fed 78, and it's pretty damning as far as the congressional power is concerned. Factions pop up again. Stare decisis, it's just briefly mentioned, but if you have to discuss the court or basing its decisions on precedent, there's some quotes in here that'll allow you to do that. And lastly, justice versus injustice, that idea of partial laws, of laws being passed for certain classes of citizens, that to me is, a natural connection to MLK's letter from a Birmingham jail. All right. Can you think of any more potential uses for the document? Best of luck in studying. Pretty close to test day. So bye-bye.